had 3 tragic accidents, and Brian personally knew the state troopers who were flying the helicopter because they fly the governor and the public safety secretary around, and that's just devastating to know that the people who dedicated their lives to protecting the public lost their lives in that duty. So we should all take a moment to sit back and pray about that one. Tragedy. But as Brian said, he thinks this is the new normal, and I counter and said, not unless we all work together. Not unless we all work together can we resolve our differences, can we reconcile the problems of our past, and move forward to solve other issues. We cannot continue to spin our wheels in this ugliness in our politics. As David Brooks wrote back in 2016, the downside of politics is that people never really get everything that they want. And we're oversold so often in politics by what we can have, and it's just not reality. And one of the things I learned when I was elected to the General Assembly, you can't always get what you want, but if you try sometimes, you just might find you get what you need. Lyrics from the Rolling Stones. And joining us now to discuss that is a gentleman who was elected, I believe, in 2014, now the Minority Caucus campaign chairman, Rip Sullivan, the gentleman from Arlington. Rip, are you there?
I'm here. Good morning, Chris.
Thanks for joining us, and thanks for holding while we took care of some business there.
Of course.
Gosh.
By the way, let me just thank you for your comments about what happened in Charlottesville this week. And I didn't get a chance to listen to Brian, but I certainly know that he and his team, the law enforcement on the ground in Charlottesville and the state troopers, did all they could in what was ultimately an ugly and tragic weekend. And I appreciate your comments about trying to move forward.
Well, we have to. Thank you for saying that, first of all, Rip. I really do appreciate that. We have to. I'm not going to accept that this is a new normal. Accepting, I understand where Brian is, believe me. I'm not castigating him whatsoever. I mean, his job is to understand it for what it is. His job is to gather the intelligence and convey it and brief the governor and say, okay, here's the plan going forward. And they did a brilliant job this weekend. But I think we can be better. I think we owe it to our citizens, to our children, to our children's children, not to let this grow any further than it already has.
Well, I couldn't agree more. And I was speaking to a crowd gathering, pretty spontaneous gathering up here in Arlington over the weekend, and I was telling them about how my wife Beth and I had a rather roller coaster week. We welcomed our first grandchild into the world just a week ago.
Wow!
Which, of course, is a moment in a family's the arc of a family's life that is filled with great hope and love. But to have that week capped off by the weekend's events in Charlottesville. It was a remarkable roller coaster, and I explained to the crowd how resolved I am, and I hope the rest of the Commonwealth of Virginia is, to make sure that this next generation that this is not the new normal for that generation, and that we finally put an end to this ugliness and hatred. It is not Virginia. It's not the United States.
It is not. It was. There was points in our time, in our history, that it was very much a part of our daily existence, it seemed. This was accepted, but eventually challenged, and we thought put away in the cupboards of our history. But we haven't dealt with the underlying problems, the underlying structural problems in this country, and that is what manifests itself in our politics. Culture politics is downstream from our culture, and our culture has to get past this. Us versus them all the time, just for the sake of cable news ratings. We cannot do this as a nation anymore. We cannot. I hope, my hope is that people in this country can say, we have our differences, but we have to also deal with our problems constructively, rhythmically, systemically, and with some incremental successes. So we can say, we're better than this.
Well, I hear you. Of course, the folks that descended on Charlottesville over the weekend aren't particularly interested in constructive dialogue, which is, of course, the problem. But look, amen to you. What you're saying is absolutely right, and ultimately, what we need to take from last weekend is a sense of redoubling our efforts and of renewing our hope that we can finally put an end to that sort of thing.
And I think the way we do that, and I don't know about you, but I think the way we do it is we sit down and we have a dialogue, a meaningful dialogue about these things, saying, okay, what are you really upset about? this anger that manifests itself is fear-based. Anger is a fear-based emotion.
No question.
And what I took away from when you filter back from the horrific racial epithets that were being lobbied about and the counter-protesting, what the protesters, the message that came to me that resonated with me was they didn't want to be replaced. And I thought, wow, what is it about your life that led you to this place? That we can begin to dissembling their anger and their fear by addressing that issue, rather than throwing more gasoline on the fire about being replaced and saying, yeah, we're all blah, blah, blah. There has to be an understanding that people who have these thoughts, feelings, hatreds, animosities, weren't born that way either.
No, you know that Lieutenant Governor Northam talks regularly on the campaign trail, since he's a pediatric neurologist, about spending a lot of time with babies, looking in the eyes of babies, and babies are not born with these kinds of attitudes. They learn it, and we've got to make sure we've got to find a way to stop teaching this, to stop having anyone teach this. But you wanted to talk about other kinds of politics this morning.
Rip, I did. This is originally why I called you last week or emailed and said, "Hey, come on, and we'll talk about politics, the races, what you're saying." Okay, let's pivot. Let's try to get to the elections as it's going to be. This is going to be a part of our conversation. I don't know how long it's going to last, but if these people show up again, as they are planning to do in Richmond in September, how do you think this is going to play out in the elections?
Well, what we're seeing, frankly, even before Charlottesville, is a growth of interest in this election. I don't need to tell you, or more than likely, your listeners, that interest and participation in non-presidential elections in Virginia tends to drop off dramatically from the numbers of people who vote in presidential elections. And what we've seen in the wake of the last 6 or 8 months is a great surge of interest. When I'm appearing at events around my district, I'm seeing new faces. It's not the same folks that I see at every Democratic event. I'm seeing new faces, people who've not previously been involved in politics. And so if there's any silver lining from my point of view in terms of the results of last year's presidential election, it's that there are newly engaged citizens who want to get involved and want to participate in politics, and we're expecting, certainly hoping that those folks show up at the polls this November. And what we're hoping, of course, is that those newly engaged folks help us do well at the polls.
The turnout from 2016 in Virginia was about just a shade under, an eyelash under 4 million. And the off years that we have, the gubernatorial years, tend to be in the low 40s on turnout. Are y'all expecting anything above, say, 43, 44% in turnout?
Well, I don't know what the number is going to be, but the answer is, as I indicated, we certainly are hoping and frankly see it as part of our job, is to get that number up. It's always a disappointing number. It should be a disappointing number for all Virginians of whatever political persuasion they happen to be, that fewer people vote in the elections that even more dramatically and directly impact Virginia. That is, who's going to lead our state for the next 4 years. So, as I said, we are very hopeful that there's a renewed enthusiasm, a renewed interest in getting involved, and so we do expect. We're certainly hopeful that those numbers of participants will go up.
What are the themes of the Democratic caucus this fall? What are you all running on? What's your narrative? What are you selling?
Well, we are enormously proud of our slate of candidates, and to build on the point I was making earlier about participation. We are running in more districts than, and by we, the Democrats, I mean, are running in more districts than has happened in frankly, anyone's recent memory. Of the 100 districts in the House of Delegates, there will be Democrats running in 88 of those districts. That includes, of course, our 34 incumbents. But we have 54 challengers to the 66 currently Republican-held seats, and we're very proud of the class, if you will, of candidates that we've recruited, or in some cases have raised their hands and volunteered for this. Just to give your listeners sort of a 30,000-foot view of who these people are. Of those 54 challengers, 29 of them are women, 11 of them are people of color, 5 of them are LGBT, and 11 of them, and this frankly is the statistic that I'm most enthused by, 11 of them are millennials. And getting millennials involved in politics has been something that it's been a hard nut to crack frankly for both parties. It's been a sort of pet peeve of mine. I have 4 millennial children, and I've been beating on them since they were able to talk about the importance of being involved in our body politic. And
metaphorically.
Whether that's running or knocking doors or giving money. And so we've got 11 millennials, and it's time for that generation to step up. So we're very excited about our slate of candidates.
Well, that's great. I guess it goes back to, and that's I think a response to the Trump election in 2016. That's what everyone said. And, a lot of folks were saying, the bus is coming back from the Women's March in D.C. Produced a lot of candidates who were running for office. I interviewed a lot of them in the primaries with my role as executive director of Virginia Free. Just put a plug in there, nonpartisan, nonprofit, pro-business organization. And I did a lot of video conference interviews with them. You can watch that on our YouTube channel, Virginia Free. And we're looking forward to doing your general candidates as well. But what are their issues? What are they? I mean, it's great to have a candidate to qualify for office, to win the primary or the mass meeting, whatever it is. But is there a unifying message that the Democratic caucus is running on this year?
There's always a checklist of issues, and every district, of course, is important. What might be important to the voters of in Prince William County might be different from the voters down in Blacksburg, Virginia. But I would say the sort of unifying umbrella has to do with issues of economic opportunity, whether that's education issues and access to education, student trying to address our terrible student debt problem, whether that's good paying jobs. All of the issues that we talk, all of our candidates talk about regularly, I think, fit generally within the rubric of trying to get Virginians a raise, get Virginians a good job, continue the reinvention of the Virginia economy for the 21st century, and to make sure that no one is left behind in that economy.
Well, again, I would be remiss in my role, Executive Director of Virginia Free, if I didn't offer your candidates the opportunity to discuss that with us, but also to talk about those issues with business owners back in their districts, because they're the engines of economic entrepreneurial growth, success. How to do those things, and to get it in practice and policy, so that we get our policies right in Virginia. But also we also have to get our politics right, don't we? Don't we have to start stopping what we're doing?
Look, we're at an interesting time in American politics, and I don't think Virginia's any different. One of the things I talk about a lot on the trail is what a lot of Virginians don't know. A lot of your listeners probably don't know is that when we and you know this, former delegate, if we vote on 2,000 bills during a session. Don't hold me to these numbers, Chris, but this will be in the range of accuracy. Of 2,000 bills that we pass, I don't know, 1,800 of them might pass in the House of Delegates. 90 to 10, 100 to 0, 95 to 5. I mean, a lot of bipartisanship when it comes to keeping the wheels of government turning. But those aren't the votes that make the headlines, of course. What make the headlines are the ones where we do split along party lines, and voices can get a little more shrill, and we all know what those issues are. And we do put a premium on trying to work with both sides, and it's an important qualification, I think, for any candidate to be able to head to Richmond and at least be willing to put in the effort to have a dialogue, as you describe it, to try to work together on some of these more vexing issues.
Well, and thanks for saying that. One of the things that I found in my time in the legislature, and what I see different from Washington, D.C. And, yeah, we can talk granular issues. I remember a conversation I had with Senator Marsden one day. He might have still been in the House at the time. And we're on the elevator, and he was complaining because some folks in his district were calling him up about potholes. I said, "Excuse me?" He's like, "Yeah, my constituents call me about potholes." I'm like, "Really?" And he said, "Yeah." He goes, "What do your constituents call you about?" I'm like, "Nothing. They don't. they want to be left alone."
Interesting. Well, I get plenty of pothole calls. I can tell you that.
God help you. But one of the things I think is great about the Virginia system that is lost a lot in our conversations because people think it's just like Richmond, it's just like D.C. Blah 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 blah. We have a single object rule that says of those 2,000 bills, they have to be only about those 2,000 ideas or those 2,000 issues, right? You can't go, well, here's an Iran sanctions bill. Oh, throw in North Korea and Russia on top of that. You can't do that in Virginia. You have to vote on these things singularly. And I think one of the other important aspects to Virginia's governing structure, two more things, quite frankly, is that you can't raise money during session. So there is a hard firewall against issues and raising money, which I think takes a lot of that out of the play. It
is one of the frankly few restrictions we have on raising money in Virginia, and I agree with you, it's a good one. We could use a few more, but that's a conversation for another day, probably.
Another day, free speech, cha-cha-cha.
Yeah.
Citizens United. But and then the last one is that I want to bring up is in Jefferson's Manual, which is our governing document in the legislature, not Robert's Rules, we go under Jefferson's Manual, is that if you offer an amendment and it is accepted, you have to vote for the bill. And that requires the legislators not to have what I would call poison pill amendments that make it very difficult to pass legislation and move on legislation at the federal level because you can put all these different labels on bills or these gotcha amendments that are really difficult to run on back home. Do you think that is a better model of operating that D.C. frankly should adopt?
Well, I have to tell you, there's a lot about Virginia's politics that I prefer to what's going on in D.C. right now. But having said that, I spend a lot of time worrying, frankly, that what's happening across the river, I'm sitting in Arlington, so across the river means Washington, D.C., too often is beginning to infect what happens here in Virginia. And I agree with you that we need to sort of create a firewall and keep Virginia, Virginia. I have to tell you, I think this election this November will be viewed rightly or wrongly, but certainly in the media and around the country, as a bit of a referendum on what's going on in Washington. It's the first statewide election of the Trump presidency. There have been some special elections for Congress and that sort of thing, but this will be the first time that a major state will vote in the Trump presidency. And the results, frankly, I think will be viewed by a lot of folks, and I tend to think probably should be viewed by a lot of folks as a bit of a referendum on what we're seeing in Washington, which is one of the reasons I think this November's election is so very important for Virginians.
Totally agree with you. Totally agree with you. This is the most fascinating election probably in my lifetime because of all the other factors that have gone on in recent American political history. Because here we are in Virginia. We have this little incubator of politics, this incubator of democracy that is separate and apart from the national conversation. And this gives us a real insight. And we have a lot of national groups coming inside Virginia and doing different things to see what's going to manifest itself in the midterm. So, folks, stay engaged. Learn more about your legislators. Learn more about what they're running on. Be engaged in whatever political party you associate with or don't associate with. Get engaged. This is America. This is our democracy. We can and will do better if we work together. Rip, I want to thank you for joining us today on the John Fredericks Radio Show. We have a hard break coming up, but Rip, I appreciate your time and wish you the very best today.
Thank you, Chris. And John, if you're listening, Cooperstown's on my bucket list. I hope you're having a great time up there.